Hello and welcome back to Coding with T. In today's tutorial, we are going to learn how we are going to register admin in Flutter Web and how we are going to use that admin login so that we can keep user or keep the admin login in this admin panel. In the previous tutorial, we learned three main things. The first one is the authentication repository. We created its instance and we learn how to initialize it. Then we learn a new way to handle the persistence or to keep the user session inside Flutter Web or in the browsers using Flutter Web. And then we use another way, which is using middlewares. We will keep on detecting that which class is allowed to be viewed to the user, and if user is not authenticated, he will not be able to access any of this class by using middlewares. And plus add-on, in those middlewares you can also create your roles check, that if user is admin then you want to allow the user to access, or if user is not admin then you can deal with those things as well. So let's get started with our today's tutorial. And currently we are inside the login screen, and in here first of all you can see we can toggle this password. We will see the toggle effect. We will see how we are going to click on this remember me, and if user is going to click on remember me and then sign in, email and password will remain remembered. As you can see, currently we have already written email and password, and we have to store these both things in the local storage based on this method. So we are going to see how we can use the observer variables to change the state, like this checkbox and also like this icon is being changed when I'm going to click on this. After that we are going to get this email and password. When user is going to click on the sign in method, we will take that email and password and pass it towards the Firebase authentication to see if user is authenticated or not. And if user is authenticated, we will then check if the current user is admin, and if admin, we will let the user log in inside our admin panel. And before that, to register the admin, we will create a function, and again based on email and password, we will first register the admin in the authentication as a simple user, and then we will define a role inside Firestore. And if we open our Firestore, in here you can see in the users, all the users, there are a lot of users who are currently using this application, created their accounts, and in here I have created a new user, and down below we have a new field of role. With the role you can see it's admin, but when I'm going to open another user, and in here you can see there is no role, but from now onwards for the admin panel we will use this role variable, and if that role is admin, then only we will let the user to access our application. And also later on in the rules we will try to make sure that only a user with the role of admin can access all this data or write into this database. So we will later on change these as well. So today's tutorial is going to be a bit long but very informative. Make sure to watch this tutorial till end, and let's get started. We are creating Flutter e-commerce admin panel, and we are inside section 4. In the previous section 1 we have completed our setup videos. In the section 2 we go through all the routes, which is very useful video to check all the routes and learn different things about Flutter Web related to routing and navigation. Then in the section 3 we learn how to create reusable widgets, layouts and templates for our responsive designs for desktop, tablet and mobile, and lot of other things we learn in the section 3. And this is the section 4 in which we are about to complete our admin management. So let's get started with today's tutorial. So before directly start coding inside our login controller, the approach that we are going to use to work on the backend will be based on separation of concern. So what is separation of concern and how are you going to achieve it? To make it simple, I am going to directly demonstrate you the flow. Let's say we have this login screen, and which is a design. So first of all we have a design screen, and also you can imagine that we have a login screen.dart file which is currently containing a simple design of this login screen. When user is going to enter his email and password, and after that clicking on that login button, we are going to take this email, take this password, and by clicking on that function we will redirect this all data to the controller. And what is now controller class is going to do, it is again a simple class. We can use it as, you can name it a controller, you can name it anything, but by name the controller you can see it is going to control the data. Whenever user is going to click on that login button, we will get that data to the controller is first going to check that whether we have internet connection on or off. Then it is going to check if loader is needed, it will start showing us a loader. And after that maybe controller is going to check that if email or password or the data of this form is valid or not. And after validating, maybe we have some other checks in the controller is going to do all these type of operations and then pass if everything is valid, and if not, definitely controller will return us with some error message or informative message or the warning message, and will not perform the actual action which is going to the database. And if everything is valid and we do not have any error, controller is going to pass this data or this request to the repository, because controller's duty is to control those things, not to perform cloud queries. And for the cloud query or for the database, let's say currently we are using the Firebase, we are going to call our repository. This repository will contain all the functions related to Firebase. And later on, you have decided to change your database from Firebase to SQL, or maybe you want to use some other APIs to use your database. And for that, you just have to change your repository. You have to write your all the CRUD functions in your repositories which are dealing with some other databases, and you just have to call or change those functions being called by the controller. So controller is going to pass that request to repository to, let's say, to save this data or to check whether this user is logged in or not, authenticated or not. So that request will be went to the cloud using repository. So repository is going to receive the request, send that request to the database. Let's say in our case it's Firebase. It is going to send this request to Firebase by converting that request into a JSON format. So once this request is went to the database will send some response. If we're going to require some data, it will be the data. Let's say we want to get the user details, then it will be the user details will be sent back from the database to the repository in again a JSON format. So we're dealing with the Firebase by sending data in a JSON format and receiving data in JSON format. So once we have the data in the JSON format, our complete application does not know the JSON format. So repository's duty is to convert this JSON format by sending the data to the model, and model will have a function to map the data by taking a JSON, map the data into the class, whatever the class it is. It's a user class, then we have to map all the data to the user. And if we have a list of users, we will definitely map all the data one by one to all the users, and then we will return the list. Then repository, if there is any exception, let's say user is not allowed, the repository will catch a related exception and display a relevant message. And if not, repository will send data back to controller, and controller will send that data back to the design, and then this operation will be completed. And this is called the separation of concern. This means that we can change our design, we can create our any type of design without concerning to the backend, and also we can change the backend without concerning to the design. So this is how these things work, and based on this model we are going to work on our future videos. So first of all, I have created a user model that we have already created inside our e-commerce app. So just to save the time, I have created a class, a simple class named user model. You can name it anything, a simple user or something else, because it is a model. So I am just adding a model as a reference. Then I've created these variables because these are required variables for a user. We have a first name, last name, username, email, phone number, profile picture, role, created at, and updated at. So here is a fun thing. You can see we have a variable called role. It was not previously there. So when I'm going to go to this app role, and where it is located, it is inside the utils, constants, and inside enums.dart. Inside this enums.dart, we have app role, which is a type of enum, and we have two type of enums inside it. The first one is admin, second one is user. This means that either our application will be of admins, or users will be an admin user or a simple user. So I have created that enum over here for the role, and inside the constructor the default role will be the user role. And if we move towards here, we have some helper methods, a simple getter methods. Full name will be combined of for the combination of first name, last name. Formatted date will using the t formatter class dot format date. We'll pass this created date, and we will get the formatted date over here using this format date function, which is going to take the date and it is going to format based on the date and time. We can separately sending only date and only time with the add button between it. After these helper methods, we have an empty constructor, and then we have a JSON function. If we want to send data to the JSON, we can use these curly brackets, and JSON is, as you know, will be in the format of key and value. So we have a key in a string, and then value in a, after a comma we have a value. So it's a string and dynamic. You can see inside the dart we can call it as a map. So it is again a JSON, which will be first one will be string, as all these are string, and then second one will be dynamic. It can be any data. So we have a JSON over here. Whenever we want to send data to the Firebase, we will just call .toJSON, and all the data assigned to these values will automatically be converted to a JSON format, and we can simply get it back. And same vice versa for when we receive the JSON. You can see in a document snapshot from the Firebase, we will receive this JSON in a string and dynamic value as a document, and we just have to check if data inside this document is not null, and if it is null, we are returning empty function, which is this empty user model. And if we have some data, we will get this data and map all the data to this user model. Same like role. If data dot contains key means if there is any key like role. If there is no key, we do not have data inside the Firebase. So it's an additional check to check if we even have a key. So if we have a key of type role, then we are going to get the data of role, and if it is null, we will definitely get the user as a default. And if data of role is equal to, you can see admin.name.toString. This is an enum. By using this name property, we are calling actually the admin itself, or only admin from this enum, and then converting it to toString. And then if it is true, then we are going to assign admin to the role, else we are going to assign the user to the role. And if even it is null, we are again going to assign the user to this role. And then we have same all these values assigned. So once user model is created, we have to head towards authentication repository, which is going to deal with the backend or with the authentication of Firebase. And in the previous tutorial, we just created an instance of Firebase authentication, and in the main.dart, we initialize our authentication repository. Whenever application will be launched, authentication repository will automatically get initialized, and we have the instance over here inside Firebase auth. And based on this private authentication variable, we just created two helper methods to check if user is authenticated or what is the user data. And then in onReady method, we are going to set the persistence to local, so that even if the browser is closed and user was logged in, so that state should be maintained. Now the function that we are going to create is a future type of function. Its name is login with email and password, and we will receive email and password both in string, and it will be an async function because we have to call the cloud query. So for that, it will be a future. What we are going to return here, we are going to return the user credentials. If the user is logged in, we can send the credentials back to where this function was called. Now we're going to use the try catch. So you can see I have not just default catch over here, but I have 1, 2, 3 and 4 different type of catches, which is going to catch different type of exceptions. This is the Firebase auth exception. We have Firebase exception, formit and platform exception. So based on these exceptions, we have created our own classes, which you can watch in detail, already uploaded on YouTube. I will drop the link in the description. So we're not going to go into these details. You can easily get these type of exceptions already in the default admin panel starter kit. So inside this try catch, we are going to call a wait sign because it's a cloud query, so we have to wait. And using our authentication, we are going to simply call sign in with email and password, and we have to provide the email and password we just received, and that's it. Now what this is going to return, you can see when you hover over this sign in and email method, it is going to return the future type of user credentials. So this means that we are also returning these user credentials, so we can simply return this as it is. So that's it for the sign in with email and password. This will automatically take us to the authentication, and the next function is to register the admin. Now to register the admin, I am going to create another function which will be an async function. Its name will be register with email and password. This one was login with email and password. It's register with, again returning user credential and receiving email and password. So same, I'm going to copy these try catch over here, and instead of calling sign in with email and password, we just have to call create user with email and password, and that's it. The rest of everything will be done by this Firebase authentication package. It will take this email and password and create the user for us, and if that user is already created, this Firebase auth exception, this one will catch that exception, and then we will easily get that code and the message. If in case user is already added, then we will display that message back to, or send that exception back to where this function was called. Okay, so far we have created our two functions in the authentication repository that are going to deal with the database. Inside the data repositories and in the user, I'm going to create the user repository. Currently user repository is empty, so let's create a class user repository and extend it with the GetX controller if needed. If you do not want to use GetX over here, it's not necessary to be used. And again, we're going to create its instance so that later on, if required, we can simply call user repository.instance, and it is going to find the already created instance of this repository. Now because we are going to use the Firebase Firestore package, so for that, previously in the authentication repository class, you can see it was Firebase auth.instance, but here we are going to create the private type of database variable underscore db, and its instance will be Firebase Firestore.instance, and this is how it will be initialized. Now we can use this database to call our Firestore. Okay, in here I have created a function to create a user, create a new user. We have to pass the user to this function, and again same, it is an async function and using the try catch with all these exceptions. Now to register a user, we have to call await, and we're going to use the database instance we created at the top. Dot, we have to call the collection, which collection we want to send this data to the users collection. Dot document, and in which document we want to store the data, we want to use this user dot id, which is inside the user model variable, and inside that we want to set the data, simply user dot to JSON, and that's it. So it is going to receive the user. If you see the user model, again we have an ID over here, and we also have a function of toJSON, which is not going to take the ID, but rest all the data will be converted to the JSON format. And we have the user ID over here, and dot set will call user dot toJSON. This means that a JSON will be passed to this set variable, and this query will automatically send the data to the Firebase in this users collection. And currently we are not returning anything, means that if we did not catch any type of exception, this means the data is stored and we can successfully move on or move to the next step. So far we have created the functions that required for the repositories in the user and authentication repositories. Now we can close the repositories, go to features, authentication, and inside I have created a controller which is going to control all these things for the login operations. And inside this login controller, again it is extending with the GetX controller, and to find that instance which is once created using get.put, we will call login controller dot instance. This is just a variable name. You can change these names as well. And we have two functions inside this login controller. The first one is to register the admin, and another one is to email and password sign in, or sign in with email and password, because both have to deal with the cloud functions or the cloud calls. That's why they are using async, and return type is a type of future void. Okay, first of all, before writing everything inside these functions, we have to create few variables. We have created 6 variables. The first one is a boolean variable. First two are boolean variables, and the first hide password is by default true, and remember me is by default false. And you can see they are OBS variables. If you already watched the section 2 in which we covered in detail about all these type of variables in detail. So for now, just a quick review what this function is going to do, or this variable is going to do. It is a type of OBS, means that this variable is now the observable variable, and whenever this hide password will be change its value, will change from true to false, and wherever it is written inside our design, we will use the OBX widget, which will be the observer widget, which will keep on observing these type of variables which are .obs, and whenever there is change inside these .obs variables, it will trigger the redraw of the design, and the new design will be right in front of us. So we have two variables that can change its state, hide password and remember me. Then we have the instance of local storage. If you go to the prospect.yaml file, you can see we are using get storage over here, and we have to call the get storage like this to create its instance. And before using this get storage, if we go to the main.dart, and in here we have to initialize the local storage by calling await sign and call the get storage dot init. This is going to initialize the get storage, and without initializing this, you might not be able to store any data to the local storage and retrieve it, like in the shared preferences in Android. Then we have a text editing controller for email, password, and definitely a form key for the login form. Once we have these keys assigned over here, we can simply go to the screen, login, widget, and login form. Inside this login form, we can first create instance of our controller. So because we also know that there will be no instance already created for the login controller, in here we are going to create its instance using get.put, which is going to create a new instance of this login controller if it is not already created. So using this controller, now we can access this class. First assign a key to this form using controller dot login form key. Then we can again assign the controller of this email and this password. And also to add a validation, we have to call validator, validator dot validate email. So validate email is a custom class. Validation is the custom class, and inside we have a validate email function. You can find this validation class in the utils, validators, and we have validation.dart. We can validate email, validate password, validate username, and bunch of other functions already created. You can modify these functions as well. So validate email is going to validate email, and same way we have a validator for the password. but instead of that I'm going to use an empty validator, because in the login form we do not want to make sure that it's a strong password. So we just want to check that if it is a valid text or not. It should not be empty text, so we have to call validate empty text, pass the field name, which will be like username or the password if it is required or not. In this case it is password, we have to pass the password, and if it is null or empty we will display as password is required. We will receive the value, and using a fat arrows we can call the validator dot validate empty text, name of the field, and then the value we received over here. Now inside this password field we want to toggle the state of this suffix button, which is currently a static one single icon. We want to toggle this whenever this icon button will be pressed. So to do that, because we have an observer variable, so to observe a change inside that variable we have to first convert this widget or wrap this widget into another widget, which is obx, and as a child it is going to convert it to a function. Now this text form field can be redrawn easily using this obx widget only if there is observer variable exist inside this function, which is a text form field. You can return any widget inside this function. Currently we're returning the text form field widget. Now to hide the password or to show the password, we have something called obscure text, and we are going to assign the value if it is hidden or shown using controller dot hide password, and to assign the value we use dot value, because hide password is a type of obs widget, which is, you can see it is a type of rx bool, not the simple boolean. So to extract the exact boolean value we have to use dot value. So obscure text will be visible if the hide password is true, and it will be not visible if this hide password is false, or vice versa. Maybe I confused with this true and false, but let me just complete it quickly. And in the on press, let's create a fat arrow or a single line function. So I'm going to use controller dot hide password dot value. Whenever it will be clicked, I just want to toggle the value of controller dot hide password dot value. If it is true, I want to return not means false, and if it is false I will return true. So by this way we can toggle the on press event. And also for icon, remove this constant. Inside the icon I can call the hide password. If it is true, I want to display this icon, and if it is not, I want to display this icon. And same way inside this checkbox, currently you can see this checkbox is by default true, which is static and it cannot change itself. So to change it, we have to call controller dot remember me dot value, so that whenever remember me is true, the checkbox will be true, and if it is false, checkbox will be false. And on it on change, and definitely to redraw the state of this checkbox, we have to wrap it with the obx widget, create a function, and again using controller with a single function, single line function, controller dot remember me dot value will be equal to the value we received over here. If this value is true, remember me will be true, and if it is false, remember me will be false. And whenever there is change inside this variable, automatically you can see it's assigned over here, will be redrawn by the obx. Now in order to sign in the user or to register the admin, we are going to create or use this elevated button to call a function, because we already have a function. So we will call controller dot, let's say first we want to register the user, so we will call register admin. And if we want to let the user log in, we have a function which is email and password sign in, so we will call this function, and the same function or the same button will call different functions. So I'm going to press Ctrl D to duplicate, and first one will be commented out. So first we have to call the register admin so that we can register the admin. Once this admin is registered, we will uncomment this email and password, and we will comment the register admin line so that we can later on keep on using the email and password sign in. So first let's start digging with register admin, and also to check if these two things are working or not, we have to call, or we have to run our application. Okay, our application is running, and let's try to write something. You can see it's obscure, we cannot see it, and when we're going to click on this, you can see obscure is changed, and also this icon is changed. Now we can also change this remember me option. So when it is selected, remember me variable will be true, and if it is not selected, remember me variable will be false. This means that we are good so far. So first of all, let's talk about the register admin. First of all, whenever this function will be triggered, we are going to start the loading using t full screen loader dot open loading dialog. Text will be register admin account, and images will be the dorsal animation. You can change these as well. So where this dorsal animation is created in the t images, you can see we have in the assets, images, animation, and this is the animation that we are using. So you can go to the assets, images, animations, and find the animation you want, or you can add other different animations. So what is this full screen loader? It is a custom class that I have created. Again, inside the utils, go to pop-ups, and we have a full screen loader over here. So this class has two functions. The first one is open loading dialog, and the second one is the stop loading that we are going to use mostly. This one is just a helper function. Open loading dialog will take the text and animation. We're using the show dialog method of the material class, which is material dialog dot dart, and using that class we are using pop scope so that it cannot be used as, or by pressing the back button it should not take us to the previous screen or close the pop-up. To avoid that, we have to use the pop scope, and can pop will be false. Then in the container we have some design, and this t animation loader widget is a simple design which is taking the lottie.asset file, and if we go to the pub spec, and you can see we have the lottie animation package added. Using that package we can call the lottie.asset, pass the asset, and then rest is the design. So once created, you can also get all these things already added in the starter kit, or you can download the code from the description below. So once we have the loading started, we want to check the internet by calling await sign, then using the network manager class that I created, dot instance dot is connected. So this is a function. So those who have already downloaded this class and updated their project, if you go to the pub spec, and if you see, you still have this connectivity plus at 501, not reached to the 6, then you can use the same class written over here. And if you have upgraded your connectivity package to 603 that I have just changed, click on pubget, and after updating you will be able to encounter this issue. A value of type stream subscription, which will be list of connectivity result, cannot be assigned to variable type of stream subscription connectivity result. This means that now they put everything of connectivity result into a list. Previously it was not, so we have to modify this. You have to change this rx type to rx list. Also add a list of connectivity result, change it to again a list of type connectivity result, and over here we have to receive the list. Change these if statements, and also this is connected. We're going to call the connectivity dot check connectivity, and if the result, if there is anything in the result, because now it's a list, then we're going to return false, otherwise return true. And then we have to close the stream subscription. Now to use this stream subscription and to check whether, or to display the pop-up whenever there is change inside our connection, for that in the bindings you can see I have created a class, general bindings class, and it has a network manager and a user controller already added. So network manager means that this network manager is initialized whenever our application launches. Using this general bindings, it will automatically create its instance and will keep on listening for the network changes. And inside the app.dart we have to declare the initial bindings, and as an initial binding we have to call our general bindings over here. Now whenever our application will be launched, it will automatically listen for this network manager, and it will create a stream subscription. And if you want to watch this network manager tutorial, you can again watch it from the YouTube. I will drop the link in the description. Okay, back to the topic. If we have the internet connection on, we want to register our user with the email and password inside the authentication. We have to call await authentication repository. Because its instance is already created, so we can directly call dot instance dot the function that we created, which is register with email and password. And in here we need email and password, and I'm going to provide a static email and password over here. If you want to give dynamic email, you can get this email and password from email and password variables at the top. Furthermore, to not change the actual code but just to change the variables later on if we required, I have added this email and password inside our t-text and created two strings, which is admin email and admin password, so that later on we just have to change this email and password over here instead of changing into our actual code. So once our user will be registered inside our authentication, now we want to assign a role or register a user inside our Firestore. For that we have to create the instance of our user repository, because we are not sure that if already its instance will be created when this action will be performed. So we have to go for get.put, call user repository, and now using this user repository we can call await user repository dot create user, and inside this create user we have to pass the user model, and we can create a user model right away over here. First of all, we have to pass the ID. To get the ID, we are going to use the ID of our, because over here you can see this user will be registered into the database, into the Firebase authentication, and whenever that user will be registered, this means that we can now have that user instance inside our authentication repository. So we can use authentication repository dot instance dot auth user or authenticated user, and because we know it is not null at the top, we just created it, so we can add exclamation mark dot get its UID. And after that, I have added the first name, last name, email will be the email that we just used for registering the admin in authentication. The role will be assigned from approle.admin. Again, it is an enum, and then we have to use the created at date to created at .now. Now, once this will be done, we have to remove the loader, and now we have to redirect the user. And for the redirection, because we need to redirect user multiple times, so I am going to create a function over here inside authentication repository, which will be the screen redirect function, and it is going to check the user. If user is not null, will be redirected to the dashboard, otherwise to the login screen. And now we can directly call the redirect function over here inside authentication repository.instance.screen redirect. And also above all, we have to cut this complete code and wrap it with a try catch. We will receive the errors in the e variable, paste all the code in the try, and in the catch, if we receive anything in the e or any exception will be caught, we first want to stop the loading, and then in the tloaders.error snack bar, we want to display that there is some error or there is something went wrong. Now this is tloader.error snack bar is again the helper class, which is tloaders class, and I have created three things: success snack bar, warning, and error snack bar using get.snack bar. And this is the design, and we have a title and message passed using these curly brackets. So I have passed the title, I have passed the message. The message will be e.toString. Whatever we received over here will be passed to user. And now once this admin register method is completed, we are going to test it. But first, let's quickly create a similar function of email and password. Okay, I have just added all the code. Most of the code is similar. We have the try catch. Catch is again similar, and we have the loading. Then we are going to check the internet. And in here, using the login form key that we assign to the form, we are going to get the current state dot validate, and using not sign, we're going to see that if it is not validated, we're going to stop the loading and again return as it is, because the login errors will be displayed right below the text form fields. And after that, this is a function which is using a remember me variable. If this remember me variable is true, using dot value, we will check if it is true or not. We're going to use the local variable that we created at the top. If the remember me is true, we are going to use this local storage dot write to write email and password inside the local storage, so that we can later on access it using write function. We are going to add a key over here because it is a key and value pair. So we will use remember me email key, because using the same key, we will be later on able to access whatever is stored inside this local storage, and we will get the email written at the top .text.trim. So this email will be stored in here, and same remember me password key will be used to store the password inside the local storage. And quickly, if let's say we have saved this to get email and password, whenever the login controller instance will be created, this means that whenever the login screen will be opened in front of user, we have a function. By pressing Ctrl O, override the onInit method. This function will be triggered, and super.onInit, and at top we can access email and assign to this email variable using email.text is equal to, by again calling the local storage, this time not write, but we can read it. How we can read it? We have to simply copy this key over here. And in the previous tutorial, when we created this tutorial for the e-commerce app on the YouTube, most of the people are saying that we are receiving null over here and we cannot understand what's going on. This means that if you did not assign anything to this remember me email, you must have to make sure that if it is null or not. So this double question mark means that if we receive null over here, we want to assign an empty string to this email so that our design should not be crashed. Same for the password. Make sure these keys exactly be same so that we can extract the data inside this local storage based on these keys. Okay, once we have stored the data, if required, inside the local storage, then we will call again authentication repository dot instance, and this time it will be login with email and password. We will pass the email and password from the text fields, and once we did this, and once we completed this thing, we are going to call the user controller dot instance dot fetch user details. So what is this? Down below you can see inside the register admin, we store the data inside the user repository, or using the user repository, we store this user data inside our Firestore database. Now while logging in again, we want to fetch that data by using a user controller, which is going to deal with all the data of the user. So this is an empty function of fetch user details. It is this user controller is created right next to the login controller. You can add this logic into login controller as well, but that's up to you. So to fetch the user details, first of all, we have to, because we again need to call the cloud query. So I'm going to choose the try catch, and in the try, we have to create an instance of our user repository. And in here, to call the user repository, to get the user, you have to use user repository and make sure to use the wait sign user repository dot fetch admin details. This is a function that we will create in few minutes, and we can simply return this user. And in the catch, we can display an error message, and we can return from here as well. And you can also rethrow this error by writing throw over here. In that case, we do not have to return anything. So later on, we are going to use this same detail of this fetch user details inside our header. We will fetch the details and display these details in the header of our admin panel whenever user will be logged in. For that, we are going to use these. Now we first have to create this fetch admin details in the user repository. So let's go it. Create a similar function like create user, name it fetch admin details. And in here we have same try and catch. And in the fetch admin details, we're going to return the user model, which will be fetched from the Firebase. So create a document snapshot variable using a wait sign. We will use the same database which we use to write the data. Now we are going to use the same database to retrieve the data from same collection of users. Dot which document we want to read. We want to read the document of this authentication repository dot instance dot authenticated user dot uid, and by calling dot get, we will be able to receive all the data of this document, because you see, while storing the document, we use this user ID, which was the authentication ID. So at that time, we use this ID to store it. And now we can use the same ID of this authentication to get this document, which we just stored. And just at the time of returning, we have to check if document snapshot dot exist. This means that if it is not null, we want to return the user model dot from snapshot, because we will receive the JSON over here. So we have to receive the JSON and convert the JSON into a user model. And for that, we have to pass this document snapshot, and it will return this user model, and this user model will be returned. And if there is nothing, we want to return user model dot empty, because we have already added a check of if else over here. So in that case, we do not need anything like this. We just have to return the user model whether it is empty or not. So we have the fetch admin details. Let's go to the login controller, and once we have those details of that admin, we will remove the loader, and we will check if user role, the user we just received, the role of that user is not equal to admin. Then in that case, we are again going to call authentication repository and logout function, and a message that we want to display is not authorized. You are not authorized to have or do have access, contact admin. So this is what we will display. And in else, if that user role is admin, in that case, we simply want to call authentication repository dot screen redirect. This means that again, if user is not null, he will be redirected to the dashboard, otherwise on the login screen. And if you want to see the logout function, down below in the authentication repository, I have created a logout simple with the try catch. And in the logout, we have to call Firebase auth dot instance dot signout. And once done, we just have to remove all the screens using get dot off all named and go to the login screen. And by this way, we are done with our email and password sign in, and also with the register admin. Okay, I've changed the email to testme@codingvt.com, and same admin at 123 is the password. Okay, our application is running, and currently we are targeting to register the admin. So we can simply click on this sign in button. It is saying registering admin account, and you can see email address is already registered. Please use a different email. And the reason is we changed it over here. We did not refresh it. So let's save the code. Let's go back and click on sign in, registering admin account. And you can see we are logged in and we are inside the dashboard screen. This means the user is successfully created and redirected to the dashboard. For that, we have to go to our Firestore. Okay, so now you can see inside our authentication, we have a new email which is testme@codingvt.com, registered just now May 1, 2024. And if we go to the Firestore database, in the users, you can see a new user created at this time with email, all these details, and also updated at the same time with the role as admin. This means the data is stored and our user is now logged in. Okay, so that's it for today's tutorial. I hope you learned something new, and if you learned something new, please like the video. And if you are new here, make sure to subscribe to YouTube to watch all the upcoming videos. Once again, thank you for watching. Take care.